Braxcast time once again. This is the 31st episode of the Braxcast, and we're going to be covering the Rippazine in detail, but I got one question of the day first, and of course I'm going to give you the Horseman update since that collection is ongoing. Just checked, $565,000 in sales, over 9,000 books sold, so the fans are really gravitating towards Horseman, and for good reason. We've got Chuck Dixon and Joe Bennett, who really knocked it out of the park with Alpha Core, and it seems like they're knocking it out of the park with Horseman. Again, of course, when the book comes out in November, I'll tell you all about that. But I have read just a bit of Horseman because of that preview in Rippazine #2. But I definitely want to get into that whole magazine since it's a really good one. But I want to answer this question of the day first. So, who's your favorite villain so far and why? Now, some people might say Splatterpuss. He was revealed in Gooding, introduced. He has a very clear beef with Gooding being, his childhood bully and having that very clear, rivalry being established. And of course, it plays out in that book. And of course, you've got the whole, aspect with, his companion, Eric Species, Spec, whatever, and the Procurement Inc. So there's a lot of really interesting stories that can be told on that basis with, him being involved in Procurement Inc. and having this rivalry with Gooding. But for me, my favorite villain is going to be a twofer, Michael Copper and Lillian Renashi. So one of the reasons why I loved Alpha Core #1 so much was the fact that Lillian Renashi and Michael Copper were operating in this way, like through people and all these shell corporations. It's really interesting that they're people that they don't want to get their hands dirty with all the dirty work, so they, put it out onto other people, and they're operating through all these shell corporations in so many ways that the law really can't nail them down on anything solid. And the Alpha Core, having to operate within the law, are really playing this real cat and mouse game. And I think it's a really interesting story arc. And of course, they got introduced in ISM #1. They had like one page. It's part of the reason why ISM 1 was felt as haphazard as it did, because it was trying to introduce a whole bunch of stuff to really have a whole comic book universe to get into, right? You have the fact that these two characters were introduced in ISM #1. They could be expanded upon in Alpha Core #1, and as the issues keep on going, because I imagine they're going to run into the Alpha Core again as they try to do all these shenanigans with Flores Park, and that's really where I'm really interested in them as villains, and they're my favorite villains so far. Is definitely Michael Copper and Lillian Renashi. I don't view Santuan as a villain. I view Santuan as someone who's willing to do villainous stuff, but you could pay him to be part of the Alpha Core, and he would probably sign on and do that, right? So I don't view him as like this ultimate villain. Of course, the Devlings are pretty interesting, but who's behind them and all that stuff remains to be seen. And then, of course, we've got Shodron, and we don't know too much about Shodron, but he's just this typical big brute that just goes around killing for the sake of killing. So that's not an uninteresting character inherently, but I don't think he holds a candle to Michael Copper, Lillian Renashi, just because of the way that they operate, has this much more multi-dimensional aspect of how their story unfolds, whereas something like a Splatterpuss or a Shodron, they're going to be much more one-dimensional villains. And that's not to say that they can't be good or interesting. It's just they're not going to be nearly as interesting to watch their stories unfold as Michael Copper and Lillian Renashi. So that's my take there. If you agree with me, leave a like. If you don't, you can complain at me in the comments. I really don't mind. I always love reading the comments. But we're going to get into the Rippazine. And before we get, into, the meat of it, I want to highlight the signature series. So we've got the standard one, collector's edition. Not the standard one. We have the standard one and the collector's edition. This is the standard one with the cover by Ronaldson Foray, who's doing a cover for both Horsemen, and he did the C cover for Gooding. So he's definitely got a good repertoire in the Rippaverse as a cover artist, and this is an absolutely fantastic cover. I love the style of it. I like Gooding. I love Saoirse. I got a thing for Saoirse. The redheads really get me going, especially Saoirse. Woo-wee. And we've got Horseman right here, and we've got all this stuff. Like with Lillian, with this here. It just makes it look and feel like a magazine cover, which I absolutely love. And then we've got the collector's edition. if I can show it off to you guys here. This is the collector's edition. So Cannon White did the art, and again, Ronaldson Foray did the cover for this. That's what this is saying. Could be for Cannon White as well, but I'm not sure. It says here it's Ronaldson's cover, so we're going to go with that. But this is a really good piece of Saoirse, and of course you've got Saoirse with the cityscape. You've got this yellow and or this golden red really motif going on. So I really absolutely love this cover. It's a really nice collector's edition. And even still, you've got this little red or yellow bar up here, excuse me, that does still retain that feeling of being a magazine, which I absolutely love. So hopefully you enjoyed looking at those signature series. And of course, they're both signed by Eric July, very subtly, of course. But we've got the actual magazine, not in a slab, so I can show it off to you. So you've got this, of course, the collector's edition cover on the interior here. You've got the letter from the editor-in-chief, Alexander Rodriguez, who I interviewed. He had the letter for the last one. This is just a very basic one. Basically just, saying, thank you to the fans. You got any contact or anything to say about the Rippazine, contact at Rippaverse.com is where you send that that feedback and criticism, and of course thanking for the support and the feedback, because without that, then Rippaverse cannot exist, because it's a company made for the fans and only has gotten as far as it did because of the fans. Basically paraphrasing there, but it's a very nice letter, short and sweet and to the point, which is really nice. Of course, you've got the basic credits for the magazine itself, the table of contents here, which isn't organized by page number. It's topical. So you've got the feature comic, which is Saoirse. You've got the Flores Park Gazette. You've got the character spotlight, which is Gooding. You've got the artist corner from Cannon White. And one interview from Neurotic. I believe there were 3 in the first issue. And then you've got the previews and a bird's eye view as well, which is the basically ongoing joke comic book series or comic series. It's, a 1-page comic. We had the first one in Rippazine #1. We had the second one in Rippazine #2, and it seems to be taking a parody of events that happen in the Rippaverse and integrating the pigeons and the hamsters in it to really up the meme value of them, which I absolutely love. But we're going to get into the first, we're going to go just through the entire Rippazine. So this is the artist corner with Cannon White, basically showing how to draw arms and use shadowing and line weight and all these things. So there's a lot of technical stuff. I don't want to get into it. I did read this. I did actually trying to draw out that one arm. Actually looked halfway decent. Drawing hands is a really hard thing for artists, and I haven't really gotten into drawing anatomy yet. That's a very hard thing. But when I do, I imagine stuff like this is going to be really, really nice. So, picking a light source, begin inking line art starting with simple line weights, adjust the color of the line art, drawing the arms and all those sorts of things. And then basically developing it from, this basic sketch that you see right here. If you can see it like that, to this is going to be better, to the this more fully developed, fully shaded, having it look like light is actually hitting it, the shadows giving that impression of that, and also just allowing the viewer to be cued into what the muscle definition and where the shadow and lighting is hitting, and by using that coloring and line weight and all that stuff. So Cannon White's a fantastic artist, and giving some insight as one of the first things you read about the Rippazine is a really, really cool thing. So very much so. And now we've got the feature comic. So this is Saoirse by Eric July with Cannon White doing the interior art. Wilson Go colored this, and the Invisible Art Studio is lettering this. They seem to have become the comic, or become the letterer for the Rippaverse, and I definitely really enjoyed this one. So Salvage was a great comic. I really liked that, and Saoirse is a great comic as well. Introduces her character, establishes her as to, hey, this is what you're doing. You're going to be infiltrating a party at the, a party somewhere, and then basically just her trying to get the information, and then it all going. And of course, you've got this very nice red dress of hers, and this is just a really, really nice, short story. Of course, it ends just as it's getting interesting, which is the biggest criticism I had for Salvage, and that criticism maintains for Saoirse. It's just as you get into reading it, and her story is like really getting interesting, is right when it ends. So I definitely want a full story for Salvage and Saoirse. Because the LF certification for Forest Park is a really interesting idea, and I think through the stories of Saoirse and Salvage, not just them and themselves learning more about them, but learning more about their clients, is how we would find out a lot more about Forest Park and how that city-state operates and why the LF certification exists and all of that really cool stuff. So this is a really interesting story. Ken White did fantastic work on this. He's a fantastic artist. Give him more interior work. Definitely have him draw a full, 50 to 100 page story for Saoirse. Get Bart Sears to do that for Salvage, and I'm going to be a happy camper. And it's definitely justified with what I've read from Saoirse and Salvage. But Saoirse is a fantastic story. Art's really good. She's a fantastic character design. A very svelte redhead is always going to, get my intention engaged. And here we've got Alpha Core, or not Alpha Core, we've got a Bird's Eye View #2, which is just, like I said, it's a bit of a meme comic, and I honestly enjoyed it. It's a bit of a short and sweet one, but that's really all I have to say about that. I think I like what Bird's Eye View is doing, just being like, you melding together stuff that happens in the Rippaverse, stuff that happens in memes that the community is drawn to, the pigeons and the hamsters, and then just, making a short joke comic, which I think is a really nice thing. So we've got this interview from Neurotic. So the Saskas give a pretty lengthy interview with Neurotic, asking about, what he likes about horror, his, content that he makes on YouTube. Of course, Neurotic Geeks and Gamers very much are outspoken against the current cultural climate in entertainment, and I don't want to get into any of that stuff, since I want to keep this about the Ripverse. I want to keep this about this positively, but we know what Marvel, DC, Disney, the rest of Hollywood, and all the TV networks are doing in terms of these content issues, and Neurotic is definitely very outspoken about that. And it's basically an interview about that, the first comic he read, his experience with addiction, and all these sorts of things. So it's a really nice interview. I really definitely liked it. And the Saskas did a great job interviewing him, and Neurotic gave some really nice answers. And we've got Lillian's hot tea. So this is some gossip. This is, throwing some shade about Ingrid Valtes, about how she hasn't been on a date in years, which is why she's so angry. You've got some stuff with Bloodroof. You've got some stuff with, Yaira going down in the events of Yaira #1. So there's some pretty interesting stuff. It gives us a little bit of insights. I think, let's see, we've got the one with Bloodroof. Oh, yes, I have it on good authority that Sydney Bloodroof is a little sneaking thief and should be very careful about who she steals from. She's only just arrived in Forest Park and is already making powerful enemies. So, the fact that, Bloodroof likes, the seal thing, so she isn't this exact moral exemplar. She's definitely doing some shenanigans. So the stuff she says is interesting, but it's not like, anything it's not a groundbreaking revelation. It's just this, gossip that's like, oh, that's interesting. It makes your ears perk up, right? So that's the whole thing that I like about Lillian's Hot Tea, and I really wanted to keep being an ongoing thing in the Forest Park Gazette. Next, we've got Harriet's Kitchen. So Harriet Selman is Isom, or Avery Selman's mother, and this is a mac and cheese recipe. So if you guys want me to try and recreate this mac and cheese recipe, leave a comment down below. I'll definitely consider doing something like that. But I always have a hard time making, it's called a bechamel, where you take flour and fat, and usually butter, and you make that into a roux, and then you pour milk slowly, and then you make a nice bechamel, and then you would melt cheese into that. I've tried to do it a couple of times. It's really hard to get the consistency right, and not making a proper cheese sauce, but that's how you make a proper cheese sauce. And of course, you mix a bunch of cheeses together, so you're not just doing like cheddar, you do like cheddar, mozzarella, Colby Jack, sharp and round, so that way you have a variety of flavors for your cheese part of the mac and cheese, of course. But anyway, that's getting a bit too much into the weeds of cooking, but this is a pretty nice recipe. I imagine if you made it, it would be pretty good. But it's a nice thing. So we've got the Goodings character spotlight, which makes sense considering his book is the most recent one that came out, and we do have Horseman in his pre-order stage. But as of now, as this book this magazine first fulfills, Gooding was the book that is the most recent release. So doing a character spotlight for him makes sense, and this is a pretty decent character spotlight, just covering his basically most of his story in Gooding #1, and then of course going a little bit into his story as we know him in Isom #2, where he's operating Gooding services in Shadow Valley and providing those services. Of course, with Gooding the polymath, that's not very well established. There's definitely this time in between the ending of Gooding the polymath and Gooding in Isom #2. There's that gap in time there that I think having two issues or two more books that follow Gooding's story would really, it would really do justice to Gooding's character to have those two books take place in between that gap of time and really establish Gooding services, establishing itself in Shadow Valley. And of course, as Gooding is doing that, all these other things that happen, I imagine, with Splatterpuss and other villains, and of course, you can get Madwire involved in there, and there's a whole bunch of interesting things that Mike Baron put into that story that can definitely be expanded upon, along with him establishing himself in Shadow Valley. But this is a pretty nice character spotlight, but it doesn't really say that much more if you read Gooding if you read Gooding the Polymath, and you of course read Isom #2 and saw his appearance there. But nonetheless, it's still a really nice character spotlight, and I definitely want them to keep doing stuff like that. And now we've got the comic book preview. So this is we don't have any pages for Bloodroof. We just know it's coming on the way. The Bloodroof or the Saskas are writing it later in 2024. We might get that Halloween release for the pre-order. October is around the corner. I mean, can you believe it? Time really flies. We're in mid-September, so if they do a Halloween pre-order for Bloodroof, that would be a really great opportunity. It would be a really fantastic thing to do. I'm sure the Saskas would be really happy to have their horror comic book for the Riververse during Halloween, so they could really go balls to the wall and hyping that up. But we'll see where that comes. Anyway, we know it's on the way. We know it's going to be fantastic. We've got that fantastic cover by Cannon White, which is a really nice one, and we know that Montagne is attached in terms of the art, and Brett R. Smith is doing the color, so I'm sure it's going to be a really interesting book visually. And of course, the Saskas had a great story with Yair #1. I'm pretty sure they'll have a fantastic story for Bloodroof as well, considering that character is even more in their ballpark, considering their history of horror movies. But this is a preview for Gooding the Polymath, and I reviewed Gooding, so there really isn't much else I have to say about this. And now we've got the preview for Horseman, which is a really interesting thing since Horseman isn't out at the time. And I did show this when Horseman campaign last week, the first episode of Braxcast after the launch of the Horseman campaign, just showing off just how cool the Horseman art is. Of course, it really just starts with a one-page piece of art of the villains that Horseman's laying down the law to, and then of course you've got this epic two-page spread that just looks fantastic. Joe Bennett's art is so good. The colors make it pop. The lettering is right where it needs to be as well. So I am really excited to read Horseman and really dive into it. And of course, this costume's a bit different, so like the change that Horseman's going to go through and all this stuff. So it's definitely Chuck Dixon said this was a bit of an origin story, but it's not the full origin. There's definitely going to be a sense of intrigue that you're going to get at the end of this book that justifies having more Horseman stories, which I think they're already working on the next Horseman story. And if they want to do a full animated season, which is the aspiration, then I think you need at least 6 issues of Horsemen in order for that to feel justified in terms of there being enough source material to adapt, right? And this is what the Rippaverse should really be, is taking the comics and having this great library of comics and then adapting that into other media. With animated shows and movies being the first logical step, and then having stuff like video games and of course live action is really hard to get correct. Because it's so expensive, and having the actors be cast correctly and keep their roles in an ongoing sense. I mean, the MCU has had a lot of problems with getting the right actors and keeping them on board and all that stuff. So I imagine the Rippaverse, if they jump into it too quickly, they will have the same problems. But this was a fantastic preview. I just want the rest of the book. And that's really the end of this Rippazine. So this is definitely a shorter issue than the first one. It doesn't feel as meaty because this one only has one interview, but it still has a great comic in Saoirse. It still has a bird's eye view, which I absolutely love. I love that they, cannot take can joke and be, unserious at times with this, especially like leaning into the hamsters and the pigeons and having that whole comic and tying in events from the Rippaverse, Rippaverse's canon into that as well. Absolutely love that. And I think, having the Flores Park Gazette is a really good thing. So, the fact that it's still there, and it's definitely very satisfying. And we had Michael Copper's, I'm not sure if I highlighted that. So we have Michael Copper's Club, right? It's basically the same thing, just him giving his Playboy advice. I did skip over this. I apologize. But it's basically the same thing. It's not nearly as world building. It's more or less just more or less just an entertaining read. And it gives you a peer into the mind of Michael Copper, and it definitely establishes him as being this, playboy pickup artist type of character, which is definitely entertaining for a story, but not someone you would want to aspire to be in real life, right? But again, they had that Copper's Club in the first issue, it being back there, and it's still executed as well here as it was there. So all in all, this is a great follow-up to the Rippazine. Maintaining a format like this and doing it quarterly, once every season, winter, spring, summer, and fall, so about every 4 months, is really where I think the Rippaverse needs to be. Every 3 to 4 months you have one of these. And I think that's where the Rippazine is going to shine, in releasing consistently and having just cool stuff for the fans. We don't need a new short story. We don't need a short story that introduces a new character every comic. Because then that means there has to be signature series slabs for everyone because it's the first appearance of a character. I think that is going to be a bit excessive for the collectors, having every issue of the Rippazine have a signature series. So I think a lot of them shouldn't, and I think a lot of them should just have short stories that feature side characters, like having like an Altona short story, or having one that covers like Vassy Silman or Galvin and Billy Bob from Alpha Core #1, or you could have Eric, Spirepuss's sidekick, and Gooding have a short story. So there's a lot of characters that definitely aren't justified in having full books and full one shots, even not to say ongoing series, but giving them some short stories in the Rippazine could definitely help with that world building and more characterization as they appear in the one shots and ongoing series of other characters, right? But I think with that, this is I don't have anything else to say for this episode of Braxcast. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this one. If you do pick up the Rippazine, hopefully you enjoy it. And Joker is out.
Thank you for tuning in to the Braxcast. Be sure to like, comment, follow, and subscribe to keep up with the Rippaverse.